we're talking about the set of challenges, the domestic challenges facing the current administration and leadership in Egypt. And of course, Egypt is a humongous country by all definitions, and not an easy country for anyone to be able to lead, especially after two revolutions and a very turbulent, how can I say, 60 years pre-2011. But one of the main sets of challenges, and some people might look at it as opportunities as I do, but it is a current and immediate challenge, and that is a population of about 110 million people with a growth rate of about 2.7%. So, we're adding about 2.7, 2.8, 2.9 million people a year to our population. And that in itself is a very, very difficult task for any leadership, especially when you're working on what they call a structural reform program. I call it, and it is a structural reform program, but I see it as a recovery reform program because that's a recovery program because that's where we're getting to, and that is pre-2011 GDP growth, 2011 pre-2011 tourism, pre-2011 everything basically is trying to recover back to that pre-2011 numbers and indices. But more importantly is that you have other sets of issues. That 110 million people, you've got 38% of them that live under the poverty line, and we're talking about that $1.9 to $2 a day. So you've got 38% of the population within that context. Additionally, that results in, of course, a lack of proper education. We've got a very high illiteracy rate as well. And more importantly, that 50% of Egypt's population is basically under the age of 30, and 50% of them are under the age of 20. So you've got this, amazing demographics, composition of the population, and it's very difficult for you to be able to do the recovery, do the the structural reform program, and be able at the same time to maintain what we call the safety net for the majority of Egyptians that are living under the poverty line and lack the proper education and literacy for them to be able to be productive part of Egypt's recovery program. So I would say these would be the main difficult parts. Of course, this leads to issues in unemployment, leads to issues in productivity, leads issues into divorce rates. So the impact of illiteracy, lack of education, and at the same time, the very large number of Egyptians that are living under the poverty line is extremely, extremely hindering for any administration that would come to the same situation or under the same circumstances. Now, that being said, there are a lot of other set of challenges that happen, and these are more regional challenges. If we look at the region around us, just next door, I'm just going to talk about our next door neighbors, and I'll consider Chad to be one of them in this case. So you've got Sudan, you've got Chad, you've got Libya, you've got, of course, Palestine and Israel, and let's throw into the mix Jordan here. Most of that region itself is extremely turbulent. We see what's happening within the context of the region, and these were places. Even Iraq at one point can be considered as part of the hindering process of what's happening in Egypt, because we had a lot of people, a lot of these, people living under the poverty line or uneducated that used to go to these countries and were workers there. You're talking about maybe 2-3 million people in Libya, another 3-4 million that were living in or working in Iraq, and they've all come back, and that adds to the unemployment problem, adds to a lot of other issues domestically. So, until we are going to see some kind of recovery or some kind of normality within the region, I think this situation is going to continue to be quite challenging for Egypt. In 2019, there was a constitutional amendments that had taken place, and part of these constitutional amendments that were ratified by Parliament and had gone through a popular referendum as well, and that was to change the terms about in the 2014 Constitution, the presidential terms and how long a president can stay. And hence, Sisi is in his second term according to the 2014 Constitution. But starting in 2022, he will be able to run for president again with a longer term, which will be a 6-year term, and he'll be able to run for 2 terms, and hence we could be expecting to have Sisi in the presidency for a good 2031, 32, 34. So he'll be able to run in 2022, 2028, and he will be able to exercise 6-year terms rather than the 4-year terms that were placed in the Constitution. Now, the Constitution, even the amended Constitution, says that the presidential terms will be only 2 terms, but it's sort of like a reset. So, they'll go from the next elections with another 2 terms, but there will be 6-year terms. So we're probably going to see, there will be elections as they were in the past 2 presidential run-ups for presidency. And it is very, possible. I mean, very, very possible that Sisi will be able to, get the votes and maintain his leadership in Egypt till about 2034. So that there has been constitutional changes that sort of manage that. There was, Parliament was overwhelmingly pushing it, and they did ratify it. The popular vote went for it in the referendum as well. So basically, I don't think we're going to be seeing major changes in the upcoming 2 elections in Egypt under the new constitution. Being on the ground here in Egypt, you have to look at it from 2 perspectives. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood, actually 3 perspectives. The Muslim Brotherhood International Organization, that does really exist. And then you had the leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood here in Egypt. It was the birthplace, but not by our choice. Again, a lot of people, if you read the history of the Muslim Brotherhood, you will get to the point that they were a foreign sort of implantment into Egyptian society even back then. And then the third aspect of this equation or variable of the equation, are the people, the regular Egyptian people. There's about, if the numbers are correct, about 2.2 million, Egyptians that subscribe to being part, directly or indirectly of the Muslim Brotherhood as a thought ideology rather than an actual organization. And we'll look at the international part first, and they're spread all around the world, but the majority of them will be probably in the United States, and the others in Turkey. And we can see that, Erdogan and the Turkish current administration and government and leadership is a very strong part of that international organization of the Muslim Brotherhood. Whether they like it or not, it is a truth. Then you've got the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, which was the most prominent of them all as the birthplace of the Muslim Brotherhood. So they had the strongest offices here in Egypt. And the leaders were also, living and were members of parliament pre-2011 and, well known and by names. And, in a sense, were given some leeway to be part of the political process pre-2011. Of course, they were again given this leeway as part of the political process post the 2011 revolution. But the reality at the end of the day is, when you look at the composition of the Muslim Brotherhood and really try to understand it, I mean, it's not like you walk into a company that is registered and has a legal entity. The Muslim Brotherhood per se, it's an ideology, and either you really can't take that away from people. So you will find a lot of the 2.2 million people that I talked about, or Egyptians that subscribe to this ideology, still probably do subscribe to the ideology. And herein, that is the political Islam, that is the creation of the Islamic Ummah, or the reviving of the Islamic Ummah, countries without borders, a caliphate, going back probably 1,400 years in thinking. And with the advent of the Erdogans of the region, a lot of the Muslim Brotherhood thought that this could be another model that they can emulate here in Egypt by playing the West with their own tools, and that is democracy and open transparency and all of the things that we see Turkey having tried to do, and now really showing the other side of the coin. So that was really the perspective, that they're going to come to Egypt. They're going to use the Western tools of democracy and transparency and governance to solidify their power in Egypt, and then move with their true agenda. And the true agenda, again, is to wipe away all of the borders of the Arab or Islamic region to become a one Islamic ummah. And I think that's really not the true basis of democracy, and it's not the true direction of where Egyptians, 110 million people, minus 2.2 million of them, where we want to head with a modern Egypt that is built on its real background, true civilization of 7,000 years. You cannot eradicate that by simply taking away even the minority, which is the Coptic Egyptians, which are about 12 million to 13 million people now, if not a little bit more than that. So it was very, very difficult for them to be able to come in and convince, if the rest of the world, yes, but to convince the Egyptians that they are the way forward and they will be leading Egypt into what we believe should be the natural place of Egypt globally. So you will find very little people talking about the Muslim Brotherhood today in Egypt, or at least promoting themselves as being such. The rest of the Egyptian leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood are either neatly tucked away in Qatar or neatly tucked away in Turkey, with a couple of them in London, others in the United States. Probably the ones in the United States are a little bit more active because they get the, how can I say, the audience of some of the senators, some of the Congress people, some of the media. But in all reality, as we move forward here in Egypt, they have really not, they're not part of our day-to-day lives. They're not part of our day-to-day thinking. There are, of course, some hindering steps that they take. We might call it terrorism in a sense, but that's all around the world as well, so you can't really pinpoint. But we strongly believe, a lot of Egyptians do, that they are the mother of all terrorist organizations. Again, you cannot just simply because you replace what a man wears, like a suit and a tie, change the ideology of them, doing whatever it takes to be part of or create this Islamic Ummah. So, they're not really being taken into consideration as an opposition, even right now. You can't really call them an opposition. You can't see them in the street. There's no influences. Nobody promotes themselves specifically as being part of the Muslim Brotherhood. I think the 2013, revolution, which was, despite how Western media and a lot of other countries might have viewed it, it was a popular revolution. It was even more popular than the 2011 revolution. It was in a sense, the way and the means that Egyptians, not just told the Muslim Brotherhood, not all other terrorist organizations, but for the rest of the world, that for a country that is 7,000 years old, that is known specifically for building pyramids under their religious context back then. We are religious people, Muslims and Coptics, and we will not be dictated and do not allow for an organization, a terrorist organization like the Muslim Brotherhood, to dictate the way that we believe in God or the way that we practice our religions. And I think in 12 months, the Muslim Brotherhood had instigated the Egyptian people to such an extreme where these numbers were, some people might doubt the numbers, but there were 30 million Egyptian people in the street, asking for the ousting of this organization, which we never believed to be in power because of a democratic process, really. Because, democracy here it's a fine line. I mean, yes, you can have democratic elections, but then if they're not fair and they're influenced by the concept of God, if you do not vote for the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, you're going to go to hell. I mean, that's a very, very, very big statement to be using, and hence, really, we've talked about inclusion for all minorities in society. There is nothing wrong to have an ideology as such, as long as you do not revert to any violence, which they have and have done, and we've seen it as somebody that lived through the 2011 revolution onwards in Egypt. We have seen their violent acts. We continue to see a lot of their violent acts simply because they're not probably labeled Muslim Brotherhood, but if you call them Mujahideen of Sinai, if you call them whatever it is, at the end of the day, they all fit within, whether it's ISIS, whether it's whoever it is, as long as the ideology is eradication of the borders, national sovereignty, and a buildup of a Islamic Ummah, or in the case of Erdogan and Turkey, the reviving of the Ottoman Empire, is always going to be unacceptable for not just the leadership, but normal Egyptian people as myself and others. By default, we've got this incredible religious balance that we have here. You'll find people on Thursday evening, which is our pre-weekend, Fridays in the States type of thing, that they'll go out, they'll have fun, they'll have weddings, belly dancers, maybe have a couple of drinks here and there, a smoke here and there. But on a Friday, they're in the mosque, and on the weekends they're in the church, and it's a very religious based culture since the ancient Egyptians, and dictating to them on how to practice and what your future is, and then take away your national identity, as confusing as our national identity is now. It was very, very unacceptable by the people. And then take into consideration what was happening around us with this Arab Spring. We were looking at what's happening in Syria and what's happening in Tunis and what's happening in Libya, and the extremism of the approaches of such terrorist organizations. And again, it was this push from the United States very specifically on saying, we've got to respect all opposition, and that I respect, yes, but respect the opposition that is actually within a context of national sovereignty, not a terrorist organization, as I like to refer to them, that is using your support as the West, with tools of democracy, that in a country that has only till today had three, actually we'll call it four presidential elections, and if we're gonna play that game and call it the first democratically elected president of Egypt, it's not true, because the first democratically elected president of Egypt was Hosni Mubarak, believe it or not, and that was in the 2005 presidential elections. It was the first ever multi-candidate presidential elections to happen in the history of Egypt. Again, I'm not saying that they were fair and transparent, but that was the first time that Egyptians went down and had multi-candidate candidates running for office. So, the 12 elections were not the first, and he was not the firstly democratic president. And if you were on the streets, if you saw the lack of transparency, if you saw all of the infringements against the concept of democracy that happened during these elections, and again, if you give people the choice that either you vote or you go to hell, and that's a very, very, very strong message, and hence can get a lot of people, and like I said, 38% of our population lives under the poverty line, and almost 30% that are illiterate and uneducated, and hence very easily manipulated by the one thing that they are so confident and sure of, and that is their relationship with the supreme being, regardless of what religion that you are. So you don't need to convince Egyptians to get veiled or to go to the mosque or to pray to God, and they were just pushing it a little bit too much, and it just took them a year to show their failure that this is the only thing that they had in their pockets to actually play around with as leadership. The other thing is they lacked complete and utter experience in anything regarding economics, regarding politics, and what they did was basically a Stockholm syndrome in a sense, because they had been under the Mubarak regime and Sadat regime before that. Let's say they were oppressed to some extent. They were given a little bit of leeway, in the 2000s, where they were members of parliament, known as Muslim Brotherhood. I think there was a good 30 of them in the parliament at the time, if not a little bit more. But they had zero experience and started to use the same tactics and the same methodology and the same, approach as the Mubarak regime had done in terms of, giving out things at elections, food, money, providing, cooking oil and rice and spaghetti and Qur'ans and things. I mean, really, again, totally out of context of what we believe the democratic process in elections should be. Now that being said, I'm not going to say that the past two elections have been the fairest elections either, but that is by definition just a maturity of a population that has never gone through elections before till 2005. So when I say it wasn't fair in a sense, a lot of people, because Sisi was extremely popular in the 2013 elections. Everybody wanted him to come in. He was, in a sense, until today, considered to be a savior against these terrorist organizations that were trying to take Egypt, influenced by countries like Qatar and Turkey and the United States and a lot of others that had vested interests to see Egypt fail. So the difference was that in polling booths and stations, you'd have pictures of a Sisi all around, but not in the station itself, but on the buildings around it. Cars driving around singing songs about him. So it was a very fine line between what you would call fair, free elections versus, in this case, it was a national hero that saved us from these people, and hence we were just celebrating him coming into power in a sense. So he never went on a campaign trail, for example. He never gave speeches before his election in 2013. None of that really happened. So I think every country needs to take its time in creating its democratic process, and go through a maturity level. And I think Egyptians need to fix a lot of things demographically within Egypt itself before we can really say that we've reached that maturity and sophistication of free democratic elections as we move forward.